Mr. Moderator, members of the audience and people viewing from outside this hall, I'm very honoured to have been invited to this particular conference, which of course is in the memory of Asma Jahangir, who was I regret that I never met her on my visits to Pakistan. She was a very inspirational person, a very courageous person who achieved many things in her life. And I was also pleased that I had the opportunity to meet her two daughters and her husband. At this time in the world, many countries in conflict where human rights are abused need more Asma Jahangirs to defend human rights. And probably the most important one at this point in time is in Israel, wherever there was someone like Asma Jahangir that might persuade the Israeli government to stop murdering innocent civilians in Gaza. There has to be a solution to that problem, but it has to be a peaceful one. I was pleased, Mr. Moderator, to come here in 2002. And what inspired me to take a very frank response is that I greatly admired those courageous people in Pakistan who defended human rights in civil society and also in the media. And I was particularly conscious that in the media in the last 10 years, 150 journalists who tried to reveal what was happening in Pakistan were murdered. On the 30th of April 2002, President Musharraf held a referendum seeking endorsement for an extension of his rule for a further 5 years. The referendum was seen by many critics, including myself, as a departure from the roadmap for the restoration of democracy. Possibly in an attempt to assuage international opinion and assure the international community that the roadmap was on course, General Musharraf invited EU Commissioner Chris Patten to send an election observation team for the 2002 October general election. He asked me to lead that 164-strong team. When I was a politician in Northern Ireland as part of the United Kingdom, I led the Alliance Party. The Alliance Party was the only party in Northern Ireland that had both sections of our divided community voting for it. Chris Patten was a British minister in Northern Ireland at that point in time, so he knew I would not be afraid to come to places like Pakistan and Sri Lanka and do what is right, and I thank him for that. However, when I arrived in Islamabad in August 2002, I was met with a hostile reaction. I can only guess as to the possible reasons. I suppose it wasn't helped by the fact that I had strongly criticised General Musharraf's sham presidential election. When we met the Pakistan authorities following our arrival, we were informed that there would be no formal invitation, no memorandum of understanding, no security protection for our team. Additionally, we also received a hostile response from the then Pakistan Election Commissioner. I suppose it was no coincidence that he had been on the Supreme Court judge. He was a Supreme Court judge who had conferred legitimacy on Musharraf's coup. Things then went from bad to worse. Just over a week after arrival, I was personally attacked in what can only be considered racist terms.
Speak closer to the mic.
Speak. In 4 simultaneous speeches given by 4 government ministers in each of Pakistan's 4 provinces, I was called a Western white who came from a country with hostile attitudes to Pakistan. I was also charged by another of interfering in Pakistan politics. When I challenged that particular minister subsequently at a face-to-face meeting to justify his comments, his response was extremely revealing. He said it was because we arrived too early. We arrived too early in the country to observe the election. Implicit in this comment was that our unexpected early arrival meant that we would catch them in the process of rigging that particular election. They wanted us to arrive in polling day and everything would be arranged perfectly. Thankfully, we came some months earlier. EU ambassadors to member states were not enamoured with our presence. Many did not want us to rock the boat with General Musharraf for a number of reasons, including the imminent possibility of an outbreak of war with Iraq and the US. Others because they represent countries that had strong trading relationships with Pakistan. In Cummings' an overall assessment of the 2002 election based on the 7 internationally accepted criteria for determining that an election process had been free and fair, our team came to very clear conclusions, as the moderator has pointed out. In particular, we concluded that there was unjustified interference with electoral arrangements and the democratic process, which prevented Pakistan's major political figures, including Benazir Bhutto and Nawaz Sharif, from contesting the election. The Pakistan authorities had therefore engaged in a course of action which inevitably resulted in serious flaws in the electoral process. Additionally, we pointed out that the restoration of power from a military to a civilian administration should have been about the transfer of power from a military to a civilian administration. The powers that had been reserved to the President and the National Security Council, in our view, raised serious questions as to whether or not this would happen. 3 days after we published our report on the election's flaws, the EU presidency, on behalf of all member states, issued a joint declaration in Brussels on the Pakistan election. In it, a number of things annoyed me, but one in particular. An EU election observer mission monitored the elections and issued a statement on its preliminary findings on the 12th of October 2002. The European Union commends the Pakistani authorities for their cooperation with the EU observer mission. That was totally false. I was furious at these comments. I considered their remarks to be a betrayal of the work that we did in very dangerous circumstances, and told them so. There was no political will in the part of the EU Council and the Commission to act on our conclusions, despite the fact that the EU had indeed the capacity to take action, because there is a strong emphasis on human rights and democracy in the EC partnership and cooperation agreements, and human rights clauses are included in all of these agreements with third countries in Clause 1. Fortunately, I could, because by sheer coincidence in January 2002, the European Parliament Foreign Affairs Committee had also appointed me as a rapporteur for the EU-Pakistan Third Generation Agreement. So when I returned from Pakistan, I blocked that agreement. I held it on hold and was supported by Commissioner Trispatten, my parliamentary colleagues and democratic forces in this country. Unfortunately, I was to be disappointed 2 years later when, after massive lobbying by member states and members of the EU Commission at the time, they persuaded my colleagues on the Foreign Affairs Committee to change their mind. So, in a debate in the last term of that Parliament, the recommendation to approve the agreement between the EU and Pakistan, it was passed very narrowly. But I had also been asked to do, because of the guilt of my colleagues and not maintaining their support for what I was doing, to do a report on the abuse of human rights. That report was passed unanimously by the Parliament. So you had a decision, two votes, which were total contradictory.
I'm sorry for interruption, John, but you have got 1 more minute, yeah.
I didn't want my name to be associated with the approval of the agreement, and I resigned the rapporteurship. My feelings were mollified to some extent, and I'll finish on this point, moderator, when the former Prime Minister of Pakistan, Benazir Bhutto, sent me a 2-page letter which he published not only in Pakistan but internationally, and I'll quote 2 paragraphs from it. I write to thank you for the support you have valiantly and persistently rendered to the cause of human rights and democratic principles of Pakistan. The democratic forces in Pakistan are disappointed to learn that a democratic crusader who stood up for the disempowered people of Pakistan is no longer an EU rapporteur. We may have lost a great supporter of the cause of human rights and democracy, but you have inspired many others and illuminated the path for them to tread. That was the warmest letter I have received from many international leaders, and I thank her family who are watching this for the support she had always given me. So, shukriya.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you.